Hey, this is Faye, and today I thought we'd sit down and read something from a newspaper. You see, Eorzean actually have three major newspapers. The Harbor Herald from Limsa, also known as the Herald, the Mithril Eye from Mulda, also known as the Eye, and the Raven from Gridania, that's just called the Raven. But aside of getting prisms that'll make their respective emblems sort of hover over your head for 5 to 10 odd seconds, I don't really think a lot of us have that much of a relationship with these newspapers. Still, they have published a lot of interesting little bits of lore and a lot of well-written pieces. Now, these entries detail the 1.0 era going forward, and they're meant to comment on in-game developments. And there are some really interesting parts dealing with the approach of Dalamud, as well as some mystery that is going on, and some people and some quests and some monsters popping up. But there is also some things like when they added Chocobos to the game, they made these really nice pieces or articles about Chocobo. So today we are gonna go through the articles that the Herald had on the Chocobo, written by the Eorzean journalist Peter Winsome. Aside of being really rather touching pieces, they also tell us a great deal about Chocobo and their roles in Eorzean, and I just quite frankly found them very fascinating and rewarding to read. So here is me reading it for you so that you don't have to. Standard disclaimer applies. I am not a native English speaker, and me do all the foreign words very well. Yes. So I hope that you can see through that and just sit back, relax, and enjoy while we read a little bit about my little Chocobo. Harbor Herald, my little Chocobo. Connecting all lands and peoples in her everlasting embrace, the sea bears to Limsa the wisdom and voices of 1,000 shores. In today's edition, the Harbor Herald examines the events which led to the departure and return of a feathered friend. Ishgard resumes export of avian mounts. A tale of childhood disappointment. There was once an ordinary little boy who came from a working-class family. His father was a fool of a man, a dockhand who squandered all the meager coin that he earned on drink. Yet one blustery day, in an inexplicable fit of affection, the drunkard saw fit to gift his son with the object of his desire, a chocobo egg. Over the moons, with joy, the boy went about tending to the life blossoming within, with such singleness of mind as only children are capable of. After a fortnight went by, however, what emerged from the confines of the shell was not a noble steed in the making, but a dodo chick, nigh as round as the encasement that had held it. Struck dumb and raked with disappointment, the boy fell into depths of depression, becoming still more disillusioned with the father in whom he had precious little faith from the first. In time, however, he came to appreciate that a chocobo was not an object within the means of a simple laborer, and learned to look back in fondness at his old man's gesture. Chocobos to pace the wilds of Eorzean once more. Owing to its ideal natural environment, the Holy See of Ishgard has long been Eorzean's foremost producer of fine chocobos. Decades ago, however, the city-state began imposing harsh restrictions on exports, quoting a dwindling chocobo population. This led to a steep decline in the number of birds across the continent, which was said to have plunged as low as 1 in every 50 score folk, giving rise to a fear that chocobos would vanish from the face of Eorzea entirely. Avian lovers now have reason to rejoice, however, for some days ago it was announced that Ishgard will once more supply the other city-states with mounts. The move has raised many a smile upon the faces of rental stable operators, but much more is at stake than the prosperity of local businesses. The resumption of imports were made possible only through the joint efforts of the grand companies of Eorzea, who impressed upon the Ishgardians the vital nature of fleet-footed reconnaissance units in dealing with the Gallian threat. So it was that the isolated mountain nation relented and agreed to provide all three grand companies with birds, but not without conditions. Reluctant to relinquish their monopoly on chocobo breeding, the Holy See will permit naught but male birds to leave its domain. In response, the other nations have raised their voices in objection and are seeking to overturn what they deem a profit-driven decision in the midst of wartime. Not wanting to see how the protest will unfold, the three grand companies have decided to make provisions ahead of the gathering storm. At home, no sooner had word arrived of the return of chocobos than the Maelstrom commissioned Naldeg and Vimily with the mass production of reinforced barding in a bid to strengthen its military capacity on land. Jests can now be heard amongst the sailors that the thalassocracy will finally have a cavalry to call its own. To end on a personal note, the thought of majestic steeds in tight formation arrayed in gleaming suits of armor is enough to set this reporter's heart aflutter. Indeed, it was the very imagining thereof that put me in mind of my childhood. Of my little chocobo, that was not quite a chocobo, but whom I adored nonetheless. Peter Winsome. My Little Chocobo Makeover. New barding designed, forging to commence. Connecting all lands and peoples in her everlasting embrace, the sea bears to Limsalominsa the wisdom and voices of 1,000 shores. In today's edition, the Harbor Herald examines the events which led to the departure and return of a feathered friend. The Tragic Ride of Uranus. Allow me, if you will, to venture some 100 years into the past, as I recount for you today a tale of bravery, loyalty, and heroism the likes of which our Eorzea has not seen since. The date is 1468 of the 6th astral era. The forces of Alamigo have crossed the Veladina River, whose waters form the border with neighboring Gridania, and now claim dominion over the East Shroud. With its invasion into these lands sacred to the Forestborn, Alamigo, a garrison state known for its jingoism and expansionist ambitions, sparks what will come to be known as the Autumn War. But Gridania would not be made to stand alone for long. The following year, the three nations of Limsalominsa, Ul'dah, and Ishgard, keepers of the watch over Migo's hegemonic belligerents, would dispatch reinforcements to the embattled area. By joining their might to that of Gridania, an alliance is formed, and the Alamigan offensive is stifled. Serving in the last altercation of the Autumn War, the second Battle of the Shroud, is a young Elysian knight of Ishgard by the name of Beltrand Durandare and his spirited warbird Uranus. Riding alone on a routine scouting, Beltrand discovers a flying column of Alamegan infantry and archers on a clandestine march devised to maneuver wide of the Allied front and flank it. But he too is discovered by the enemy, and before he can spur Uranus to bolt, an Alamegan volley of death rains down upon them. For every 10 archers who miss their mark, there is one who strikes true, and in the blink of an eye, both rider and mount are riddled with arrows. Somehow, in spite of his wounds, Uranus finds the strength to break into a full gallop, and only narrowly escapes the enemy's grasp. And then, the true miracle. From some inner fount of unending will and love, Uranus, guided by instinct alone, bears Beltrand back to the Allied camp, miraculously keeping his unconscious and near-death master in the saddle the entire way. The life of Sir Beltrand is saved. He makes known the movements of the enemy's flying column, and by his report the Allied forces avoid encirclement at the hand of the Alamegans and in turn execute a counter-offensive that would turn the tides of the battle and eventually deliver one of the most monumental victories in Eorzean history. Sadly, Uranus would not know the victory for which he was solely responsible. The wounds suffered and the toll exacted by the return journey would prove too much for the bird, indeed for any bird, and mere moments after seeing his master back to the safety of camp, Uranus collapsed, never to rise again. Chocobo barding soon to come. Despite grievous wounds, it is thought that it was a single arrow to the side of the breast which in the end claimed the life of Uranus. A single, crudely made arrow. One amongst 100. Such an insignificant thing to claim so grand and noble a life. Determined to never see such a tragedy repeated, the armorers of Naldek and Vimily have created a set of barding from the fires of their forges. It weighs heavy on the heart to think that such an armor may perhaps have saved the life of Uranus, whose self-sacrifice born of loyalty saved the lives of so many others. I have it on good word that designs for the new barding, which were commissioned by the Maelstrom of Limsa, are now complete, and mounts are already being outfitted with the first batch crafted for testing in the field. Should the result prove favorable, Naldek and Vimily will begin mass production. From what I have heard, the barding is ingeniously devised so as to protect the vital area of the body and head, yet without hindering the speed or movements of the chocobo. Moreover, there are slated to be a variety of forms to appeal to as wide an aesthetic range as possible. It would seem we are finally drawing near the day when the heavily armored chocobo will at last be a reality, albeit 100 years too late. I hope that you enjoyed that. If you did, then the link to the different articles is in the description. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope that you will have a great day and that I'll see you again. Bye!